Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this edition of Walking Through History. We are in Ruth chapter 4 today, as we are concluding our studies in this beautiful story of faithfulness and of good character and of love. It really is the closest thing we have to a love story here within Scripture. Maybe throwing a couple of other examples here or there, but it certainly is a beautiful story that again shows us the faithfulness of God, though he is not mentioned all that much here within the text, at least as being explicitly stated as having done this or that. We do see him being present in the fact that so many things that others would draw up to just happenstance or just just happen to work out that way, coincidence. We believe God had a hand in it. And we're going to see today exactly why we believe this to be the case, because we're going to see that the end result of what has taken place here in Ruth, what that leads us to, and certainly is a wonderful ending that sets up the history of Israel moving forward. Thank you for joining us today. We'll begin into the text in just a second after we welcome my good friend Alan Sienestrang, who is with us as always. Alan, good to see you today. Thanks for being here. And let's get going and get into this, to the conclusion of this really, really awesome book of Ruth. It certainly has been a breath of fresh air following what we did in the book of the Judges.
It's nice for things to finally work out
Hey, that's
just a
right.
little bit.
That's right. Yeah, but there's so many stories within the Judges of promising outcomes, and yet there always seem to be some character flaw, some weakness, some poor decision making that cause things just go haywire. But that's not going to be the case here within Ruth. Things are going to work out really well and in a beautiful way. If you've been with us so far, you already see how this is going to turn out. You already know that it's going to be Boaz and Ruth. At least you may have been thinking that until we're introduced into this unnamed family member who actually would be the first choice in redeeming this family within the family of Elimelech. We do not know his name, but Boaz has mentioned him to us in chapter 3 as Ruth goes to Boaz and sets up this opportunity for her to request of him that he be their family redeemer. Boaz seems honored by this request because he appreciates the nobility of Ruth and appreciates her faithfulness and her good character. But he himself is a man of good character. He says, as much as I would do this, I'm not first in line. And we need to go about this the right way. We're going to let the first man who has first rights, you might say, we're going to let him have first opportunity. If he refuses, then as the Lord lives, I will be the one to redeem you. But we have to talk with him first. And that's what we're going to see here in chapter 4, that Boaz is going to go to the gate of the town in Ruth chapter 4 and verse 1. And he sat there, and soon the family redeemer Boaz has spoken about came by. Again, coincidence? Maybe. Did Boaz know that this was something that he would probably do? And maybe. Is it God's providence? Possibly. We'll see. Boaz said, come over here and sit down. So he went over and sat down, and then Boaz took 10 men of the town's elders and said, sit here. And they sat down. And he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has returned from the territory of Moab, is selling the portion of the field that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should inform you. Buy it back in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you want to redeem it, do it. But if you do not want to redeem it, tell me so that I will know, because there isn't anyone other than you to redeem it, and I am next after you. I want to redeem it, he answered. And then Boaz said, on the day that you buy the field from Naomi, you will acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the deceased man, to perpetuate the man's name on his property, which is the levirate type of relationship being fulfilled there. Verse 6 says that the Redeemer replied, I can't redeem it myself, for I will ruin my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption, because I can't redeem it. At an earlier period in history, or in the history of Israel, a man removed his sandal and gave it to the other party in order to make any matter legally binding concerning the right of redemption or the exchange of property. This was the method of legally binding a transaction in Israel. So the Redeemer removed his sandal and said to Boaz, buy back the property yourself. Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses today that I am buying from Naomi everything that belonged to Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. And I have also acquired Ruth the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife to perpetuate the deceased man's name on his property, so that his name will not disappear among his relatives or from the gate of his hometown. You are witnesses today." So all the people who were at the city gate, including the elders, said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is entering your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built the house of Israel. May you be powerful in Ephrathah, and your name well known in Bethlehem. May your house become like the house of Perez and the son of Tamar bore to Judah, because the offspring the Lord will give you by this young woman." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. He slept with her, and the Lord granted conception to her, and she gave birth to a son. And the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you without a family redeemer today. May his name become well known in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. Indeed, your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Naomi took the child, placed him on her lap, and became his nanny. And the neighbor women said, "A son has been born to Naomi." And they named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the family records of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron, and Hezron Ram, and Ram fathered Abinadab, Aminadab, and Aminadab fathered Nashon, and Nashon fathered Salmon, and Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David, and that is just not any old David. That would be the famous King David. Alan, let's just be honest here for a second. Take a step back and recognize that this is a lot of cultural customs that we just don't understand. This is just something very foreign to our understanding as far as perpetuating the lineage of a person, making sure the land stays within the family, making sure the name remains intact. Uh, even what we see here, the way that this deal went down with the handing over of a sandal, it's just all very strange to us. So what can you do to explain to our audience to help them understand exactly what's taking place here within this chapter?
Well, it helps that the whole sandal thing, whenever this book was compiled and put together, must have been many generations removed. So that it even needed an explanation there in verse 7 to the people that were reading this for the first time. Even just a couple hundred years later. But there's a lot of references to even the people at the end. They go back and reference Perez, the son Tamar bore to Judah. Just these were all Judahite the people of the Judah tribe, so they would have been even more familiar with that story. But I think they would have recognized that this is the same kind of thing happening. I mean, this levirate situation that Tamar and Judah had as well, and it's kind of interesting because what's supposed to happen, the whole point of that is to keep the land that's in your family, to keep it in the family. And there's even other provisions in the law, like the year of Jubilee. Situations might come from year to year where you have to, you have to sell your land or something just to survive. You fall on hard times and you sell the land. Well, that land was supposed to return to the original family every 50 years for the year of Jubilee. And if that does happen, so that's why it's very important for your family land, your family inheritance to stay in the family. So when something like this happened where, all the sons are dead, the fathers are dead, there is no more, there is no one else to claim that land. You have these other things like this levirate law and levirate custom to try to perpetuate another son that can claim that land as his own.
Yeah, why don't we read that, Alan? We've referenced it a lot, this being a provision within the law. Why don't you go to Deuteronomy 25 and let's read verses 5 through 10, which tells us, which is the section which gives us insight into this particular issue that we're talking about. Deuteronomy 25, beginning in verse 5, the preserving of the family line. When brothers live on the same property and one of them dies without a son, the wife of the dead man may not marry a stranger outside the family. Her brother-in-law is to take her as his wife and have sexual relations with her and perform the duty of a brother-in-law for her. The first son she bears will carry on the name of the dead brother, so his name will not be blotted out from Israel. But if the man doesn't want to marry his sister-in-law, she is to go to the elders of the city gate and say, my brother-in-law refuses to preserve his brother's name in Israel. He isn't willing to perform the duty of a brother-in-law for me. The elders of his city will summon him and speak with him. And if he persists and says, I don't want to marry her, then his sister-in-law will go up to him in the sight of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, and spit in his face. Then she will declare, this is what is done to a man who will not build up my brother's or his brother's house. His name in Israel will be the house of the man whose sandal was removed. So again, a lot of cultural custom here that we're not familiar with. But here's the bottom line here. It's all about preserving a name. That was extremely important to them. Not only preserving a name, but also preserving a lineage and property. This was the expectation for the brother-in-law. We don't know exactly the relationship here with Naomi and Elimelech or his sons, and Boaz and this other man, but they understood that they were in the brother-in-law spot. They were the ones who were expected to take on Naomi or take on Ruth, and then in a sense also taking on Naomi and preserving the lineage and preserving the property. So that's kind of some of the background we're looking at here. This is the expectation of what they're supposed to do. So Boaz and this other man are working out exactly, well, who's going to do this? Who's going to take on this responsibility?
And there are positives and negatives to that. It mentioned in that law in Deuteronomy that son that comes from the levirate marriage, the brother-in-law marrying the widow, well, that son would not be his. It would basically be the son of the dead husband, the first husband. So that's something you see happening here. There's a negative to that. It's kind of, I mean, clearly it's not a desirable position to be in, because here we have this Redeemer, not excited when he learns about the Ruth situation, going back to the story of Judah and Tamar, and of course Perez, who Tamar bore. I mean, right. That passed from the first son to the second one that didn't really want to do that because he was. He knew that the son would not be his, except he went ahead and married Tamar and had relations with her, but he didn't just refuse. He kind of had his cake but didn't want to bear a son for her. So that was why that was much more wicked than what this man is doing here. But this man is still, he's fine with the part where he gets more land, but when he learns about the Ruth situation, and that he would have to bring up a son and it wouldn't be his, and he would risk his own inheritance because now his children, his son would be part of this other family, then it becomes much less desirable. Mm-hmm. So this is not this is not an ideal thing, but the point is, this is really this is a sacrifice, and it's to help the family of the deceased, help the widow of the deceased, again, that would probably be destitute without a husband there. So so it is a noble sacrifice. But one thing that's going to be interesting is these people are worried that, I think they're more worried about their own name. They want to have their own children and have this great name. It mentions may the people at the end, may your house become like the house of Perez, the son Tamar bore to Judah. Well, people want that. They want their name to be remembered generations down the road. Well, if you're the brother-in-law and you marry and have that son, well, that son's father is not you.
Right.
It's going to be the other guy. So you're worried that you're going to be kind of forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting when it's done right here, like in the instance of Boaz. Well, we forget about the name of Elimelech and Mahlon. We remember Boaz and
That's
his
right. Mm-hmm.
genealogy. So it's still even though he did it just right, there his we still kind of consider Obed part of Boaz's lineage,
Mm-hmm.
which obviously is a much more royal and noble lineage that leads all the way to Jesus. So Boaz was not forgotten about just because he did this, and I think it's because he did this in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very interesting here, and I think it's needed to recognize that this is what Boaz wanted. It wasn't as if um, this just happened accident. It wasn't as if he really wanted this man to take the land and Ruth, and oh well, he didn't. I guess I will. I guess I'll do this. I think I think he sets it up in a way that's going to lead to this decision by this man. First of all, he just mentions a field or some land, and we haven't even seen that up until this point. Um, but he presents that first, gets the man interested. Then he says, "Oh, by the way, if you do take this land, you're also going to take this woman. Who is this woman? Well, Ruth, the Moabitess." He
She's a
just
Moabitess again.
just so happens to mention who she is, which is a foreigner, and we already know what Ruth and others thought the Israelites thought of foreigners. We go back to chapter 2 in verse number 10. Whenever Boaz comes up and speaks with her, she falls on her face, she bows to the ground, and she says to him, "Why have I found favor with you, so that you notice me, although I am a foreigner?" There's a stigma of some sort against the foreigners. So he notes that she's a foreigner, not just a foreigner, but a Moabitess, which again did not have the best of reputations. And as soon as this man says, "You know what? Okay, never mind. I'm not about this. I'm not going to get involved with this. It is a lose-lose situation for me." Boaz like, "Okay, take off your sandal. Let's get this done. I'll take care of this." But Boaz is very ready to perform this service
Mhm.
for this family. He is he's very ready to take on whatever responsibility he needs to take on and to do right by his kinfolk, which would be Elimelech, but not just for him, but for Ruth, because he has seen the type of woman that she is. I'm sure he just wasn't all sorts of tore up that he'd have to marry Ruth. He was certainly excited about this by the prospect at this point, and he was very willing to take on this responsibility, which is what he did. That they were married, and they were blessed with a child. Alan, going back to what we see beginning of verse 11, just what they say, these blessings that they pronounce upon this new couple here. Um, Lord, may you make the woman who is entering your house, or may the Lord make the woman who is entering your house, speaking of Boaz, like Rachel and Leah, the two mothers really of this Israel nation, the ones that brought about the sons of Jacob. Obviously that's a beautiful blessing to be pronounced upon them. Same thing about be like the house of Perez again, which brought about this particular nation of Judah. And what we see here, Alan, is two family lines, or at least two groups of people who have been at turmoil for a long time, relationship wise. Again, Ruth being a Moabitess from the people of Moab, which was a result of an incestuous, uh, very inappropriate uh, sexual encounter between a husband, a drunk father, and his seductive daughter. And we have that on one side. On the other side, we have again, where did Naomi and all the people of Judah come from? Well, they came from Tamar and that whole issue that took place with Judah. So you have both of these families that are in upheaval for such a long time, that are not now brought together. They intersect and they bring about peace. It's just, again, it's a beautiful, beautiful result from what had been a very turbulent period of time for these two families. And in fact, I would probably say that you could apply that to Jesus himself, that his coming to the world came about not through just very clean and simple means. I mean, if we trace back the lineage of Jesus, there was a lot of craziness that took place in that lineage, and part of that's even mentioned here in this particular chapter of the genealogy. Before we get there, Alan, would you speak a little bit about Naomi in this story? And you mentioned it in one of our previous studies. You kind of see Naomi in a different way now after going through this study again. And I agree with you in the way you see her. I think we end up seeing her getting exactly what she wanted in the end, even though she's not really praised by God or given credit by God. That all that really goes to Boaz and Ruth. But in her mind, she gets exactly what she wanted, which was a child of her own. So why don't you speak to that a little bit about Naomi and her progression throughout the story?
That I mean, Naomi, like you said, she gets this child. She throughout the whole thing, she's always talking about this idea of a redeemer, or Ruth remarrying. I mean, uh, she's concerned about her name and her husband's name and the name of her son, and and God takes care of her, but not in the same way. Like we mentioned, I mean, we don't consider Obed, their son, a son of Malon or a son of Elimelech of that line. He is associated with Boaz. So I mean, in a way, she does get this grandson that she so desired, and I think she genuinely desired for Ruth to, of course, be taken care of, and she's thinking of herself as well. But the thing that she was most worried about was her family line, and it's really forgotten, at least in the biblical text, and it's more associated with Ruth. I love thinking about just the name they chose, Obed, which actually means servant. And what did Ruth say back in chapter 3? I am Ruth, your servant. You know, Ruth was a servant. She served Naomi, she served Boaz, and she served a great purpose for the story of this important family line that we have followed from Abraham through Judah, through Perez, all the way now to Ruth and Boaz and Obed, and of course continuing on through David and beyond here. Um, it's but I mean, at this point, that we don't hear Naomi anymore. We even in the New Testament, when the Matthew 1, when we hear the genealogy, it's not Obed, the grandson of Naomi, or the son of Mahlon. It's Obed, the son of Boaz bore Obed by Ruth. And Ruth's even mentioned. So such a great honor for someone. And interesting too that we have several of these women popping up throughout the story. I mean, that usually we're not focused on the man of the line. It's always all these kind of pauses in the genealogy or because of a woman doing something, whether it be Tamar or Rahab or Ruth here. They're the ones that are showing the greater faith and the greater understanding of their importance of that family.
Absolutely, yeah. Taking a look at this genealogy, then, Alan, you should be able to see it on the screen, which is a graphic from the particular Bible that I use. This family of David that's mentioned, and the genealogy here. It begins here with Boaz and Ruth, but in the text it goes even all the way back to Perez, and that here is the main purpose, I think, of this writing, to show exactly how we got to David. And you think about it, how this book compares to the end of Judges. At the end of Judges, it specifically says that at this time there was no king in Israel, and everybody did whatever was right in their eyes, whatever they thought was right. There, at the end of Judges, there is no king. Yet here at the end of Ruth, there is a king, in a sense. He's not here yet, but we see exactly how he is getting there. And you might be wondering too, well, if people knew the background of David, his family line, they might have some issue because, hey, hold on, this guy is a descendant of a non-Israelite. Can we really have him as king? Can we really have him as the true king of Israel? Well, what does this book do? This book shows us that God was most certainly involved in bringing these two individuals together and having them be the parents that are going to bring about this great king of David. So this book serves serves a number of roles to be able to see where it is that David has come from, how God was at play, and yet what it allows us to do is it allows us to back up to really see the big picture of God at work within the family of Abraham, bringing about the fulfillment of the promises that God made to Abraham, not just the land and the nation, but the progression of that last and final great promise of the seed. And eventually, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. We go to Matthew, we read the genealogy that ends with Jesus, or I guess it begins with Jesus. Actually, begin or end. I think it ends with Jesus. It goes from beginning to end. And it has these names here. Boaz is mentioned there. David is certainly mentioned there. Well, we're able to learn about them and how this came about by this really beautiful and well put together book, which illustrates for us exactly how that came about. So there is a purpose. And I think it's really important for us to see the purpose of each of these individual writings, what they did for the original readers and what they're able to do for us. Show us how we get to David and show God as being at play here within his family lineage, bringing about this wonderful king. Alan, what else do you have to add about this, either this particular chapter here of Ruth or just the overall story of Ruth before we close out for today?
Yeah, just I think the main thing we see, the focus of this entire story is toward David. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's the kind of the bookends of the story, kind of our genealogies. We began at the very first chapter talking about Elimelech and their whole family. Those first like 4 or 5 verses were just really a bunch of names and you know who's son, and then the sons die and all that. And then now we're kind of wrapping up with this whole family line leading to David. So I think that gives you the purpose of this story. And like you mentioned, the the of course Ruth was known in Bethlehem as a noble woman, not just by Naomi and Boaz, but by all. So her character wouldn't have just died with her. I would think. I think this story would have been passed on well before it became, a written story that we can read about today. So I think part of this book is kind of pro David, just to show this is the type of people, type of woman, type of line that he comes through. But also when we compare all of these connections between this story and the story of Judah and Tamar, just the fact that, I mean, Ruth is a Moabitess, so she's a descendant of Lot, which goes back to Abraham. When that's what you would want, thinking just purely non-spiritual terms, just politically, if you're David, or if you're part of that Davidic line and you want to legitimize your rule, this is a good way of doing it. Say, hey, I've come from these great people of our history. I'm descendant of Abraham, descendant of Judah, the lion, a descendant of, so-and-so and so such and such. I mean, you want to have this strong family line. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I guess probably the British family still does that today. I've descended from King George and King Edward and King this and that. And, they remind people of the great noble line that they've come through. Well, same thing I think is happening here, except there's also a reminder of God's intervention and control. These are not always, they have not always been kings up until David. They weren't. They were just, some of them even poor farmers or just random farmers like Boaz. They weren't anything special or great, but because of the promise and the intervention and the providence of God, this family is great and will be getting greater as the story goes here, and people like Ruth and Tamar and Rahab, even women are remembered in the genealogy later on when it leads to Christ. And I mean, there's more evidence. I mean, they do that in the New Testament too. You're trying to show that Jesus is the Christ. Well, you need to show where he came from and the type of people, both good and bad, that he came through. But the fact that he says who he is, and he's a descendant of David and Abraham and Judah and all of these, just reminding us of all of the prophecies and the order of the entire scriptures that God has written for us.
Absolutely. The faithfulness of God is surely on strong display within the text. I want to read just quickly the summary that Way gives to the book of Ruth, and a summary of just everything that's taken place. He says in this summary, it is evident that God is predisposed to answering selfless prayers, and that selfless prayers can inspire others toward selfless prayer, and that faithful petitioners can also participate in God's answers to their prayers. For example, Naomi takes action for Ruth's benefit in 3:1, and Boaz takes action for the widow's benefit in chapter 3 and chapter 4. There's a great deal of selflessness that is seen in this particular book. While we might be a little cynical towards Naomi and her wanting to be able to say that she finally has a son for her own, she's looking out for Ruth's benefit, wanting her to be taken care of. And the same thing, that's what Ruth's been doing all along. Ruth has been so selfless towards Naomi, not only accompanying her back to her homeland, but also providing for her needs, going out to the fields and gleaning, gathering grain for her, for Naomi to live on. And then Boaz, of course, you mentioned very well, he might have been an older man. I think that does seem to have some credence within the text, because he says, hey, you could have pursued younger men, whether rich or poor. You could have pursued younger men. That tells me that he might be an older man, and yet he's willing to serve his family in taking on Ruth and bringing a child through her. One thing I just noticed, Alan, let's remember that Ruth was married to Mahlon for 10 years and never seemed to have a son. Now, again, was that the Lord doing that? I don't know. But as soon as she marries Boaz, they have a child that they conceive. Again, I think we see the Lord working here and accomplishing his will in his way, in his time, with people who are willing to be willing participants, who are willing to be faithful, willing to be noble in their character. And those are certainly the type of people that God is ready and willing to use. He can use anyone. Of course he can. Yeah, I'm sure he definitely appreciates using those who are wanting to be faithful to him and to live by Torah, to live godly lives, showing that good character that is expected within the law.
I want to
Alan,
highlight.
go ahead. Show us.
Yeah, I want to highlight this verse again, verse 14, and this is the women talking to Naomi after receiving the news that Obed that she has a grandson. And I love taking this verse and just thinking about Christ instead of Obed. The women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not left you without a family redeemer today. May his name," talking about Christ, "become well known in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you." I mean, that is the story of Christ as well. I mean, he is the Lord did not leave us without a redeemer.
Right.
His name will be well known not just in Israel but the world, and he will renew our life and sustain us. So thinking back to what Naomi was saying at the end of chapter 1, she was saying how the Lord had opposed her, the Almighty had afflicted her, she came back empty when she had left, when she came back from Moab. And now she is sustained. Uh, she was completely wrong in that, because the Lord had not left her without a redeemer. And now his name, and the name of that family will continue, and of course lead to the great redeemer whose name will be known throughout the world. So I thought those words were a little too perfect not to be, God kind of having a double meaning in those words as well.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Good stuff, Alan. Good stuff. Well, thank you so much, Alan, for your great
Yeah,
insight
thank
to
you.
this short book, Ruth. It feels like we weren't in it for any time at all, especially how long it took us to get through the stories of the judges. But it's been a good study. I've really enjoyed and thoroughly enjoyed the studies in these two books, and just as a way of giving people a suggestion, if you want any type of reading to do on these particular books, highly recommend Kenneth Way's Teach the Text commentary and Judges and Ruth. Has been a great aid to both myself and Alan, giving us good insight into what we have here. I'm probably going to be looking into getting maybe something else from this series for our studies moving forward. We'll be getting into First Samuel next week and getting into that text, which is going to continue on this story of Israel, and looking forward to getting in there and learning more about the history of Israel, seeing how God is progressing this story. Again, we're doing this study in order to just trace the story of the Bible, trace it from the beginning narrative through the entire narrative of Scripture, seeing how we get to Christ, because we do believe that the Bible is one unified story, that everything that it has contained within it is leading us to God fulfilling his promises in the Christ. Here we see a great, albeit a small portion of the story in Ruth, a very important story, or a very important portion of the story of Christ, because it shows us how we get to David. And of course, there's no name that maybe is more synonymous with the Christ than David. He is known as the Son of David. What a wonderful and a beautiful story this was here in Ruth. Really, really appreciate the time to have gone through it. But we're looking forward to moving into First Samuel next Tuesday. Please feel free to join us for that. If you've missed anything up to this point, you can catch it either here on the Facebook page or on our YouTube page, Walking Through History. If you do have any questions about this text or any other text, if you have any spiritual needs, please reach out to us. We'd love to help you as best we can. But thank you for joining us again. Hope you have a great rest of your Friday. God bless you as you seek to worship with his people. Feel free to join the Pleasant Plains Church on Sunday morning at 9 a.m. If you're in the area, we'll be meeting at 9 a.m. at 384 Pleasant Plains Road for a period of worship. You are more than welcome to join us in person, or if you can't, you can catch the live stream here at 9 a.m. Hope you can do that. And hope you can join us, as I said, next Tuesday, or this upcoming Tuesday, as we continue our walk through history. Let's get into First Samuel. Going to be a lot of fun going through this text. Lots of action, lots of interesting storylines that are going to be taking place. Hope you'll join us then. Until then, take care, God bless, and have a great rest of your day.